Deputy Premier James Merlino, Leader of the Opposition Matthew Guy, Hilla Oved, Spokesperson and Cultural Attaché from the Embassy of Israel, David Southwick, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, MPs, rabbis. On behalf of Altex, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to Chabad Chahukah in the CBD. Just a word on Altex, who's sponsoring this event. Altex is a financial services company that invests your self-managed super funds in first mortgage investments for 6, 7, 8 or 9%. I think there's some brochures around that you might see later. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and probably the smartest person I know as our special guest, Dr. Alan Finkel AO. Besides my wife, Alan. Alan is a neuroscientist, engineer and entrepreneur. Alan was Australia's chief scientist from 2016 to 2020 and Chancellor of Monash University as well, I remember. And Alan is currently Special Advisor to the Australian Government on low emissions technologies, or as I like to call him, the government's Tsar on low emissions. Alan.
Thank you, Alex, and I don't think Alex pointed out that I'm going to be your MC tonight, so I'd like to start off with a welcome to country, because we are gathered this evening on the land of the traditional custodians, the Bunurong Bunwurrung people and the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to the elders past and present. For the Kulin Nation, Melbourne has always been an important meeting place for events of cultural significance. So it is our special honour to be in Melbourne this evening to celebrate Chahukah, a festival of freedom and nationhood. I'd like to pay my respects to the Honourable James Merlino, Deputy Premier, the Honourable Matthew Guy, Leader of the Opposition, and it will be my pleasure to welcome you both to speak later on. The Honourable David Southwick, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, other honourable members of the Victorian Parliament, and I know there are several here tonight, my wife Elizabeth. I have to embarrass my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Eva and Jaime, and my nephew Blake Lambert, who's one of the security guards downstairs. Hilla Oved, the Cultural and Academic Affairs Attaché at the Embassy of Israel, who came down specially from Canberra. Thank you. Mary Louise Metclaus, who I just met, who's here in her capacity as President of Friends of Rumbarn University, came down specially from Sydney. Thank you. Rabbi Chaim Herzog, the Director of Chabad Melbourne, Rabbi Shaul Engel, Director of Chabad Bayside, Sylvia and Morris Freeman, Sylvia who invited me originally for this event, and all of you wonderful guests. So, as Alex said, last year I completed 5 years as Australia's Chief Scientist. And during that time, I was very active in the formation of policy for our national electricity system. I also led the development of our national hydrogen strategy, where hydrogen will be used as a means of storing and exporting our solar and our wind energy. And this year, the Prime Minister appointed me as the Special Advisor to the Australian Government for Low Emissions Technologies to help to ensure a continuous supply of clean energy while simultaneously building our prosperity. So many would say that I've been fixated on the role of clean energy supply in supporting our modern society. Some would say that I'm obsessed. Fair enough, because our energy supply is important. Energy that in future will be sourced from sunshine and wind, stored in batteries or stored in hydrogen or stored in water that's pumped uphill. Now, some could argue that I'm taking my lead from the importance placed on energy by our Lord Hashem in his role as the creator of everything. So in the beginning, Hashem created the heavens and the earth, and he said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, when I wear my scientist hat, I interpret that holy achievement as the creation of the electrons and the protons that were created to fill the universe And the first light was the light that was emitted when the protons and the electrons came together to form hydrogen. And that, according to science, was a long time ago. It was 13.7 billion years ago. But in the world of the Bible, according to many learned Jewish scholars, it was about 6,000 years ago. More recently, during the time of the Second Temple, about 2,200 years ago, after King Antiochus sent his soldiers to Jerusalem to force the Jews to worship Greek gods or be killed, it was not a good choice. The Maccabean Jews led a rebellion and pushed out the invading Greek army. The Maccabees reclaimed the Holy Temple, and they wanted to light the menorah, the 7-candle lamp that was first used by Moses in the tabernacle while the Jews were wandering in the desert. Unfortunately, the Maccabees could only find enough sanctified oil to last for one night. But miraculously, it lasted 8 nights, giving the Maccabees time to produce and sanctify more oil to keep the menorah lit every day from then on. So taking that analogy of Chahukah, my quest in life is to find enough sanctified menorah oil to give us the energy we need to run our planet indefinitely. And taking that analogy to the extreme of creation, this sanctified oil will be a combination of sunshine and hydrogen. And I take this festival of Chahukah as an opportunity to give thanks for the fact that the supply of sunshine and hydrogen to serve our society will be unlimited and will burn forever. With that, I welcome you all to this very special Chahukah celebration on the third night of Chahukah. Ordinarily, this event would be held in the Victorian Parliament, but these are not ordinary times. And instead, we are delighted to have the opportunity to hold this event at the Sheraton Hotel, and I thank the management of the Sheraton Hotel for their hospitality. To all of you, Chag Sameach, Happy Chahukah. May your candles burn bright this season. So, it's now my pleasure to introduce the Honourable James Merlino, Deputy Premier of Victoria. Also the Minister for Education. It's quite a list. The Minister for Education, the Minister for Mental Health, the Minister for Disability, Ageing and Carers. And from March this year till June, he did an excellent job as the Acting Premier. And I've known James Merlino personally from my time as Australia's Chief Scientist, because I was very involved in the educational effort in this country, and I know how well James is committed and how well versed he is in the educational portfolio. James.
Thanks very much, Alan, for that very kind introduction. And as Alan said, as Education Minister, all the Education Ministers across the country really engaged with Alan in his role as Chief Scientist, primarily because we want to encourage and engage young people in science, technology, engineering and maths. And he was wonderful to work with, and thank you for emceeing tonight. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Chag Sameach, and welcome everyone to this very special Hanukkah celebration. I am delighted to be here and thank you for the invitation. At the outset, can I acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, Matthew Guy, Leader of the Opposition, to all my other parliamentary colleagues who are joining us here tonight, Dr Alan Finkel, Special Advisor to the Australian Government, the Deputy Chief of Mission, Embassy of Israel in Australia, Ron Gerstenfeld, all distinguished guests, my rabbi, my friends, it is wonderful to be here. Can I congratulate Hubbard of Melbourne CBD and all those who have organised this event. Not the usual venue, but isn't it wonderful that we are all here together? Hanukkah is about triumph, of faith over adversity, and the miracle of the menorah flame enduring for 8 long days. It's a reminder of the oppression that so many across our world, Jews in particular, have faced and defeated for generations. It's the belief that we all have an inalienable right to be ourselves, free from persecution and suffering, to live a life in the way one chooses to live, and to worship not in darkness but out in the light of the day. The ritual we participate in tonight is one of the oldest and most powerful traditions we know as a civilisation, and it's such an honour for me to join in it tonight. And because this year, at the end of this year, we do have a lot to celebrate, the fact that we can gather together tonight. As a state and as a nation, we have endured and we have emerged triumphant. Still got challenges ahead of us, but 90% vaccination is a good thing. And in the spirit of this tradition, I want to acknowledge the victories that have allowed this event to happen. In fact, the reason that we're all here, in this room together, observing this most ancient of rituals, in thanks to so many of you here today. Rabbis and synagogues, organisations and charities, community leaders, faith schools, and everyday people who spread the word and looked out for each other. From sharing information with your community, to picking up the phone, checking in on neighbours, delivering hot meals to the most vulnerable around the state, encouraging vaccination. And I want to give special thanks to Victoria's Jewish community and many of the leaders who are here tonight who took a leading role in those efforts. The Jewish community, once again, provided leadership when it counts. Not when it was easy, not when there was nothing at stake, but when it mattered most. When the health and safety of our community was at risk, you stepped up and delivered strong and clear direction. And on behalf of our state and the government that I'm a part of, thank you. We've never been more grateful for your efforts. Victoria has always been proudly multicultural, multi-faith, wonderful place to live. We know that our state's diversity is one of our most precious strengths. It's this diversity that makes Victoria, Victoria, a place of culture and tradition, of proud communities and enduring spirit, a place of faith, the belief in something greater than our individual selves. And it's events like this, where that culture is shared, where belief is celebrated and faith is displayed, that makes our state stronger. And each and every day, Jewish values, traditions and practices like these enrich the cultural and social fabric of our state. But we all know that not everyone shares those same beliefs, and not every Victorian understands the value of events like these here tonight. There are some who conspire to rewrite the past, to destroy history, and dismantle the future we've worked to create. And we must always be vigilant of those who seek to threaten the diversity and democracy we hold so important. It's these candles of the menorah that remind us of all that has been endured and of all that has been won, and that the test of any faith is the strength it can summon to overcome all that we face in this life, to persist and triumph. To that end, our government is proud to put Holocaust education front and centre and mandatory in every secondary school in this state. We're proud that alongside our partners, Gandel Philanthropy, 110 extra teaching teams will undertake development and training with the Jewish Holocaust Centre each year. We're proud that every young Victorian will learn from history and that they will understand the past. We've taken another important step this year to ensure tolerance and understanding forms the bedrock of our society. Earlier this year, following significant work from the parliamentary inquiry into anti-vilification protections, involvement of all members of Parliament, all sides, the Andrews government announced that we would introduce legislation next year to prohibit the public display of Nazi symbols. We know how impactful the trauma and pain this evil and inherently racist symbol is on the Jewish community, and this government will make sure it can no longer be displayed. Because we must never forget dangers of intolerance, and we must always remember the power of our diversity. I want to thank you for extending me this honour and congratulate Chabad of Melbourne CBD once again for your work in organising this event. And on behalf of the Victorian Government, I extend my very best wishes, respect and sincere friendship to Victoria's Jewish community. Thank you and happy Hanukkah.
Well, thank you, Matthew Guy, for your important reflections on the... James Molino, for your important reflections on the role of culture and commitment to overcoming adversity. And now I would like to introduce Matthew Guy, the leader of the Liberal Party, the leader of the opposition, and speaking as a former Chancellor of Monash University. I'm proud to say that you did your postgraduate study at Monash University, so welcome.
Well, we are a very similar height and probably similar temper in the Parliament and a few other things, so it's understandable. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I too want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and thank everyone for your presence tonight, to the rabbis who are here, to my parliamentary colleagues, the Deputy Premier, to David Southwick, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, Paul Hamer, the State Member for Box Hill, nearly promoted you there, mate, and to everyone who is here, representatives from the Embassy, and Alex, to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Chahukah is one of those regulars now on our state's religious calendar, and this is such a reflection of where Victoria is today. We're a broad, diverse, multicultural state. We're a state that respects and understands diversity and triumph through diversity, which is all about Chahukah, but also where we as Victorians see our future. Our future is a modern international multicultural state that knows it doesn't have a Sydney Harbour or the weather of Brisbane, but what we have is something much more powerful and much more special than all of that, and that is a respect and appreciation for each other, for our backgrounds, for our religion, or not, but for all of us. And that makes us a multicultural city by every stretch of the word. And more the point, tonight, and acknowledging Chahukah again, which we usually, as Alan has said, would be doing in the Parliament, we do again because Chahukah is just so important to all of us as Melburnians, as Victorians, the triumph over diversity, where every faith, particularly the Jewish faith, has certainly been for the last 2 years, particularly the triumph over COVID, and what it's meant to so many in our Jewish community who have not been able to properly practice their faith over that time. We have got through that, and hopefully we can continue to rebuild and recover as communities beyond that. And not just here in Victoria, but also back in Israel, who have led the world in vaccinations and led the world in managing a COVID response in a sensible and modern way. And of course, a triumph over what we see, particularly David and myself, as one of the most important issues to educate and to combat in things like our schools, and that is a growing anti-Semitism. That's why we were proud to push for the removal, as James has quite correctly said, Nazi symbols, which should be made illegal and banned, as we know that the hurt that they obviously do cause, and they should be, and David in particular was very, very much at the forefront of that debate. But also and we'd be very proud to, through a government, hopefully of ours, to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which we believe is another step on educating and combating the rise of anti-Semitism. And sadly, we have seen that even here in Victoria. David and James together have combated a number of issues in schools, which we have seen right here in Melbourne, issues of anti-Semitism that need to be dealt with, both from a punitive measure but also educational, because that is how we will solve these issues in the long run. And of course, broadly, for the State of Israel. And I think all of us here tonight, and all of your MPs here tonight in particular, very strong supporters of the State of Israel, the right of the State of Israel, the strength of the State of Israel as a modern, peaceful democracy in amongst many nations that may not be that. But what Israel has is something very, very special, and what Australians should be there to support at every opportunity. A friend of ours, a friend who is democratic, who has people of all religions on, for instance, its Supreme Court, in its Knesset, in its Parliament, and throughout all the organs of government. That's something that we should be strongly there to support. Before COVID, I was very pleased to see that El Al was flying direct, I think, to Australia. Melbourne. Alex, you'd be one of the first on those, no doubt. And hopefully they will again, because what that does is strengthen great trade links with Australia's strongest Jewish community here in Melbourne, back with Israel. And I remember when David and I were in Israel, the strong level of IT development and links to Israel, even some in my own office doing some technical work through international work from Tel Aviv back to Melbourne. It is a strong reminder of the links between our cities and and Israel, and our state and Israel. And I think that it would be magnificent to see those restored as time goes on. So while we can't be in Parliament witnessing the lighting of the menorah here tonight, what we do is something just as important, and that is, again, come together as that first step out of COVID to ensure that all of us can celebrate what is not just a Jewish community event, but a Victorian event, Hanukkah, and the lighting of the menorah. Chag Sameach? Sameach? See, Ukrainian, we have a ch too. So when I was in Israel, it was easy to get a hold of the ch because there were so many people, and it's so common in Hebrew is the ch, but it's very deep and profound. And I was pleased to see it. Have a wonderful Hanukkah to all of you. Thank you very much for having us here tonight.
Happy Hanukkah. It's great to be back. Great to see you all again. It's been a very, very long year since we met last year in this room, I believe. The story of Hanukkah is a universal one. It's a very, very popular one. I think it's in the high 90s, the percentage of Jewish people, secular, religious, of all types and backgrounds, that celebrate Hanukkah in some way, much more than any other event in the calendar. What is it about Hanukkah that is so striking and that brings out that chord in every single Jewish person? The story of Hanukkah is mainly about two miracles, two remarkable stories. There was a battle of a very small group of people. You're all familiar with the story, I'm sure, the Maccabees. And there was the Syrian Greeks, not the same as the Greeks, I believe, of today. But they ran, they controlled, their government ruled over Israel, and they instilled laws that restricted and persecuted the religious beliefs and practices of the Jewish people. And it came to the point where an actual battle unfolded, and even though it was a very small group of people, perhaps as small as the group here or even smaller, and they battled the mightiest army of the day, they were victorious. And then they entered the temple that was restricted to them for some time, and they searched for the oil for the menorah, which was lit every single night, the candelabra in the temple. And they searched and they searched and they found plenty of oil which was not pure, but only one single jug that was pure with the seal, and they were able to use that. The problem was it would take 8 days, and with the COVID restrictions it might have taken 80 days until they can get new oil. What are they going to do? They didn't have meetings, they didn't go to Parliament House to take an election, they lit the candle. So we come here tonight and we celebrate Hanukkah as it's done all around the world. And if you Google Hanukkah menorah lightings, you will find hundreds in public places, in the Kremlin, at the Eiffel Tower, at the White House, everywhere else. And there are these lightings where people like us and all over the world are gathering to not celebrate the victory of the battle, but to light the candles of the menorah. Why? Why don't we enact a replica of that military victory? Now, some people will say in Victoria we're doing that, but we're not going to go there. So we light candles. Why is it? And in order to answer that question, I'd just like to share one little thought, and that's about everything Jewish. When we celebrate Shabbat, when we celebrate Hanukkah, Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, or anything else, we are not commemorating what happened then. We are celebrating Hanukkah or Rosh Hashanah or Shabbat today. This week on Shabbat, God is resting, and we are resting with Him. This year, Rosh Hashanah, He is recreating the world. And this year, on Hanukkah, we are celebrating our Hanukkah miracle and our Hanukkah story. And I don't have to really elaborate that we've been through a lot of darkness, a lot of hardship, a lot of restrictions. Of course, we all know about it. And it's very easy for anybody to say, we're just a few. The forces against us that restrict us from taking a step forward in life, from making a phone call to a friend because you can't go and see them at times, let's just leave it and I'll just live my own life. On Hanukkah we say, and this is the message not just for Hanukkah, but throughout the year, go ahead and light one candle. Even though it's a single light, a single candle, what's the chance that that will be victorious, that will win over the difficulties, the hardship that we went through, Chahukah says, go ahead and light the candle, and you will change everything, and you will make the darkness the backdrop for that light. So although things were hard, and they are still to some extent difficult and not the same as we'd like them to be, the messages in our own lives, personally, communally, in any which way it is, you know somebody who's going through difficulties now, light a candle in their lives. Just bring out something positive. Look at the bright side, as the Maccabees did. They didn't say, well, it's not going to work. What's the chance? And there was no chance. We'll give up. And of course, we know what the end would have been. Instead, they said, we're going to give it our best, as we do when we light that single, and then a second and a third candle on Chahukah. And when you do that, you actually turn the darkness, that it stops being a darkness, like I said before, it becomes the backdrop for the light. In our own lives, in our own communities, and around the world, we have the ability, we have the power to turn it around, that the difficulties should be a backdrop for a bright future for all of us. Let's all do that in our own lives, of course, by lighting the candles tonight and throughout the rest of Chahukah, but also by bringing light into our life, one little flame at a time, to our own families, to our own selves. If you know somebody living alone and there's loneliness, turn that loneliness, that darkness, into a place where you could bring a little light. Bring them a latka, bring them a panchaka, call and give them a phone call. These things are the little lights that create Chahukah by all of us. Let's do that and turn the world into a place of beaming and shining radiant light that will overcome any difficulties, any restrictions, and any darkness that exists around the world. Happy Chahukah.
Rabbi, thank you so much for all those rich details about the story of Chahukah, and I'm so happy that your version is not dissimilar to my version. It's now time, I believe, to do the lighting of the candles, so I'm going to call on the Deputy Premier and Rabbi Chaim Herzog to light the candles.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivonu lahadlik ner Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sheyasod nisim laveseinu bayamim ohem bizman hazeh.
Here we go. Mazel tov.
So we'll just sing the Haner Salolo and Moez Sur. Tidiyai, tidiyai, lididai, 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 Haneros, halalo, Haneros, halalo, Haneros, halalo, halalo, Haneros, halalo, anu madlikin al hachuos bam 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 vidam Haneros halalo anu madlikin al hachuos vial hanisim vial haniflois She'asisa lavoseinu She'asisa lavoseinu Hayomim Hohem Bizman Hazeh Bizman Hazeh Al Yedei Koyanecha Hagdoshim Yedei Koyanecha Hagdoshim Al Yedei Koyanecha Hagdoshim Yedei Koyanecha Hagdoshim Al Yedei Koyanecha Hagdoshim Al Yedei Koyanecha Hagdoshim Chol Shmoynas Mechanukah Salalu Kodeshem Chol Shmoynas Chanukah Neres Halalu Kodeshem V'yein Elanu Reshus Leishtamesh Bohen Ela Liroisan Bilvad Kidei Lehoidai Solhalel Lehoidai Solhalel Leshimcha Haggadah Lehoidai Solhalel Lehoidai Solhalel Leshimcha Haggadah Al Nizecha Al Nivloisecha V'yal Yeshuasecha Al Nizecha Al Nivloisecha V'yal Yeshuasecha. And for something a bit more familiar to some of you, Ma'asur. Ma'asur Yeshu Asi L'chanoe L'shabeach Tikon Beis Tefilasi V'sham Toida Yezaveach Le'yestachin Be'ach Mitzaram Na Be'ach Azegmar V'shir Mizmar Chahukah Samizbeach Azegmar V'shir Mizmar Chahukah Hamizbeach Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh 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 Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'higiyanu Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'higiyanu Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh Hazeh lazman hazeh.
Thank you. A minute, I wanted to introduce Alex Goodman. Alex, who I knew from the days when I was working for the Israeli electric car company, Better Place. Alex is well known for his interests in startup technology industries and venture capital. Representing this evening, Altex. Okay, please.
All right, thank you, Alan. All right, now we're going to get to the food pretty quickly. I just want to thank Chabad Melbourne, Deputy Premier James Molino, Matthew Guy, Opposition Leader, Hilla from coming down from Canberra, Alan Finkel, thank you for doing a fantastic job, Sylvia Freeman for helping out, Rabbi Herzog, you organise a lot of things in the CBD, keep it going, thank you very much, and everybody, Chag Sameach.